our jam-packed 1-hour weekly news recap. Brandon Johnson leads his first city council meeting as mayor and gives key appointments to allies who endorsed him. A new bill heading to Governor Pritzker's desk would create a 24/7 carjacking hotline in Illinois. And the Chicago Park District closes all indoor pools for at least a month. We'll break down those stories and much more. Remember, you can tune in right now to watch us on WBEZ's YouTube and Facebook pages after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The White House says an agreement is taking shape to raise the nation's borrowing limit for 2 years and prevent the U.S. from defaulting on its debt in the coming days. Earlier today, it reported that both sides have largely worked out a deal that includes cuts and caps to some spending, but disagreement over work requirements and energy permits are among the issues still under negotiation. NPR's Lexi Schapitl reports the Republican Speaker of the House sounded optimistic today about the direction of the talks so far.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy told reporters that negotiators had made progress last night and will continue discussions today. He acknowledged that it's now crunch time, but stressed that any deal must cut government spending.
We're not just trying to get an agreement. We're trying to get something that's worthy of the American people, that changes the trajectory.
The GOP push to expand work requirements for federal programs like food stamps seems to be another sticking point in the talks. McCarthy also dismissed criticism from hardline conservatives that negotiators were giving too much away, saying that only the negotiators themselves know what's being proposed. Lexi Schapitl, NPR News, the Capitol.
The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration has stripped one of the nation's biggest drug wholesalers of its license to sell opioid painkillers. The DEA action came after a 4-year delay that sparked controversy. Here's NPR's Brian Mann.
Morrison Dixon, based in Louisiana, faces accusations the company shipped highly addictive opioid pain pills despite evidence the drugs were being misused. In 2019, a federal judge recommended the DEA revoke the company's opioid license because of its, quote, cavalier disregard for safety rules. Now the DEA has finally acted. The company's ability to sell opioids will end in 90 days unless some kind of settlement is reached. In a statement, Morrison Dixon said it's still in talks with the DEA trying to resolve, quote, old issues. Other drug distributors involved in the opioid crisis have been allowed to continue shipping pain pills, but they agreed to tighter oversights and will pay billions of dollars in settlements. Brian Mann, NPR News.
An Indiana medical licensing board is reprimanding an Indianapolis doctor after determining she violated patient privacy laws by speaking publicly about performing an abortion on a young rape victim from neighboring Ohio. NPR's Sarah McCammon has details.
Dr. Bernard told the Indianapolis Star about providing abortion to a 10-year-old rape victim who'd traveled to her state from Ohio after a near-total abortion ban took effect there in Ohio. Now, Attorney General Rokita seized on that story, suggested Bernard hadn't properly reported the abortion under state law. That was proven false by documents the state released later. But after that effort fell apart, Rokita began investigating her and ultimately filed a complaint with the Indiana Medical Licensing Board.
NPR's Sarah McCammon. This is NPR News.
Sunny skies at 12:04. Good afternoon. I'm Claire Lane with WBEZ News. Illinois-based Walgreens is laying off people at its corporate offices. As Sun-Times reports, the company will let go of 10% of its employees, including at offices in Deerfield and Chicago. A message to employees said the redundancies are among a series of steps to drive sustainable costs. The company faces a pileup of financial obligations for opioid litigation and other legal matters. Thousands of students from 80 Chicago public schools gathered at Millennium Park yesterday for a day of song. WBEZ's Nareda Moreno has more.
The event is called Paint the Town Red. It's hosted by Uniting Voices Chicago, formerly known as the Chicago Children's Choir. Students wore matching red t-shirts and sang along with dozens of performers at the J. Pritzker Pavilion. 8-year-old Valeria Soto is a third grader at Alfred Nobel Elementary School. She said she was excited to perform for her family.
I feel like this event is very magical. Like all the different cultures we learned this year, it brings people together, and I feel like that's very important to the world.
Songs were sung in at least 7 languages. Nereida Moreno, WBEZ News.
Looking at sports, the Chicago White Sox are in Detroit to face off against the Tigers tonight at 5:40. Cubs are on the north side for a 1:20 start with the Reds. It's going to be a nice day forward. We'll get to a high in the low 70s today. This is WBEZ News.
Support for NPR comes from Angie. Angie's List is now Angie, dedicated to helping homeowners get home projects done well, from everyday repairs to dream remodels. Reviews, pricing, and booking are at Angie.com or on the Angie app. This is NPR.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Happy Friday. It's been a long week. So I don't know about you, but I'm just about ready to wrap things up. But before we check out for the holiday weekend, let's look back at the top state and local stories in our weekly news recap.
A big first for Chicago's new mayor, Brandon Johnson, presiding over his first city council meeting today.
Mayor Brandon Johnson entered city council chambers and got down to business of presiding with talk of unity and a new era of collaboration. But it's clear the mayor has his work cut out for him.
The Attorney General's report offers up narratives from dozens of men and women abused by Catholic priests in the name of God.
The 696-page report names 451 clerics and religious brothers who have been credibly accused of abusing children.
All right, we got a lot to talk about. Our panel today is Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome back, Tina.
Thanks, Sasha. Nice to see you.
Paris Schutz is a WTTW correspondent and co-anchor of Chicago Tonight. Good to see you again, Paris.
Hey, Sasha.
And WBEZ city politics reporter Mariah Woelfel is here. Hey, Mariah.
Hello, hello.
Let's give a special shout out to the folks who are watching us break down the news live right now on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. All right, Paris, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul released some very shocking details about widespread abuse of kids by the Catholic Church here in Illinois. Fill us in.
This investigation was 5 years in the making, started in 2018 under former Attorney General Lisa Madigan, as other states did these investigations, like Pennsylvania, and found thousands of kids that had been abused. So this obviously happening all over the country for decades, all over the world. And here's the thing about this investigation. So when it starts, the churches, the Chicago Archdiocese and other dioceses come forward and say, we've done our internal investigations, we've handled this, we've paid out to the victims, and we have 100 clergy member total that we know are abusers and they've been removed. Well, then the investigation by the Attorney General goes forward and they find more people. And so the churches come forward, okay, no, there were more people. The real number was 350. And then the investigation is published, and their number is 450 clergy members with credible sexual abuse allegations, with 2,000 victims and survivors. Many of these folks abused many, many, many times. So the bombshell here is this discrepancy. The church had reported one number, and there were 100 more than the church had listed and reported, and everyone wants to know what gives. So Cardinal Cupich of the Chicago Archdiocese goes on the defensive and says, well, all right, well, we did our investigation, and if the Attorney General found more, why didn't they consult with us? You know, we can't find everybody. And then B, a lot of these names, a lot of these folks work for the different orders of the church, because, you know, it's divided into the Franciscans and the Viatorians and all these other orders. And well, we're not in charge of those. It's the bishops that are responsible for those. And the report says, okay, there's some credibility to that. Yes, bishops are responsible for these orders. But folks like the Survivors Network of those abused by priests say, not good enough, Cardinal Cupich.
Yeah, well, let's hear a bit of some of the voices that you just mentioned. First, a clip from the AG. Here's what he had to say at the press conference.
The list fails to explain the basis by which allegations against these additional individuals were substantiated or deemed credible, and by whom. We have asked repeatedly that we be informed of any cases discovered by or disclosed to the Attorney General's office. Yet we saw new, unexplained names in this report.
So that was actually Cardinal Blaise Cupich saying, you know, the church, as you said, Paris, reported all the allegations that most of these cases happened decades, but that no priest currently serving has been accused of abuse. So I'm curious, opening this up to the rest of the folks at the table here, what do you think of the Cardinal's reaction?
Well, I just don't think it's been handled well by the Archdiocese from the start of this investigation in 2018, starting by saying, you know, we've done our due diligence. There's 100 priests that we've identified, and that's it. And then that number changes and grows over time, as Paris kind of outlined. And then to go on the defensive after this pretty comprehensive and probably the most thorough report that Illinoisans and survivors and victims have seen, to go on the defensive, I just don't think is a good look when the Catholic Church is already struggling with diminishing numbers of parishioners. They've consolidated many churches over the past decade to deal with that. And so I think to move forward, it would serve to not be on the defensive, but that's my take.
Before we hear from you, Tina, let's hear that clip from the AG.
It is my sincere hope that this report will shine light on those who violated their positions of power and trust to abuse innocent children, and on the men in church leadership who covered up that abuse.
Yeah, so I mean, how damaging is this for the Catholic Church?
Extremely damaging.
Yeah.
There are already how many years of rebuilding after decades of these types of allegations. And I think the difficulty for Cardinal Cupich is he is seen as a spiritual leader. You have so many Catholic churches in Illinois where these people want to see what he says every day in the church bulletin, and they follow everything that he's saying. So he's in this position where he has to be the spiritual leader. He has to support the Catholic Church, but he also has to speak out about this. And it's like a teeter-tottering. And I think it's really hard for him, and it's hard for the church to kind of grapple with what's going on.
And from a public relations standpoint, humility is a virtue of the Catholic Church. And to come out and be defiant after everything that's gone on over the decades in the Catholic Church, and to say, well, it's the Attorney General's fault for not working with us. Well, we're not in charge. The only response here, and editorial pages have reflected this, the only response is humility, sorrow, reconciliation, because it's so many instances here over the years, the Catholic Church has appeared that they just want to wash their hands of all this. And look, I get it, because they've paid out hundreds of millions of dollars in civil lawsuits over this. They brought this on themselves. They had abusers that many people in power knew were abusers, and they shuffled them around to different parishes where many times they abused more kids. And this happened not only in Illinois, not only in the United States, around the world. It's a criminal conspiracy, and you can't just wash your hands of it. And if you are a spiritual leader, then you have to show some kind of humility here. And people aren't just going to buy this defiance.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. If you do want to wash your hands of it, if you want to move forward, how do you expect to do that without a clear narrative of what happened, just an agreement of the facts? And it seemed that this could have been an opportunity for the Catholic Church and Cardinal Cupich to kind of let the record be set straight and move on from there. And so it is somewhat surprising that he went on the defense.
I want to play the devil's advocate, no pun intended here. On the other side, the Chicago Archdiocese touts the fact that they have set up systems, and the Cupich has said, well, we were at the forefront of it. You can argue whether or not that's the case, but the Attorney General does acknowledge that the Chicago Archdiocese did put in place a system at some point to investigate and to weed out abusers, and they have to some extent gotten control of this, although it shouldn't be mediated internally. And that's the other conclusion here in the AG's report, that it has to be external investigators and mediators that are really cleaning this up, because it just can't be internal within the organization.
It's like a college investigating sexual assaults and saying we have this and keeping the police out. It's
Absolutely.
It just seems
That's
like
not
it
going
doesn't
to work. Our friends on YouTube are chiming in. Shamrock Bloom says, it's not a surprise, but it is awful. Why aren't the clergy subject to criminal charges?
That's the other great point about this. And the AG's report kind of acknowledges that A, statute of limitations have run out, and B, most of these accusers are dead and gone. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of legal justice for the survivors here because of that.
And to your point, Tina, Shamrock says self-policing has not worked.
Right.
So the report's recommendations on how to prevent this in the future, you just mentioned, of course, taking it from just being internal.
Yeah, taking it right, being kind of an external process, external mediators. But beyond that,
it's calling for just greater transparency.
Greater transparency, and again, most of these folks are gone, and so it is kind of one of those things. Well, that happened a long time ago, and these churches have sort of gotten this under control, and they kind of understand that they need to police this going forward.
Yeah. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, we're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with WTTW's Paris Schutz, Tina Sfondeles of the Chicago Sun-Times, and WBEZ's Mariah Woelfel. A reminder that you can watch the weekly news recap live on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also leave us a comment or question. Talk to us in that YouTube chat box. And as you just heard, I may just read what you have to say about the stories on air. All right, Mariah, it's a new era in Chicago politics, would you say? Mayor Brandon Johnson, he actually held his first city council meeting this week. I know that you were there as history was being made. So how did he seem? I remember seeing a selfie on Twitter. He seemed super happy.
He had some flair. I mean, Johnson finds himself in a great, wondrous position after a hard-fought election, and he did not hesitate to celebrate kind of that moment, taking a selfie. He was very jokey, made a lot of jokes throughout the meeting. Complimented Alder people again and again for their three-piece suits, for their shirts. He said to Alderman Daniel Espada, I hope I look as good as that shirt does on you. He started the meeting, I'm sure a lot of people saw, off with a joke saying, breaking news, this is being recorded live from Naperville, which was a dig at Fox News for the report that the tribe revealed they interviewed people in the suburbs about Johnson and his challenges ahead. So in many ways it was a lively and positive meeting.
But at some point they got to work.
They did get to work, and Johnson had a big accomplishment getting through his restructuring of city council committees. He placed some of his biggest allies in powerful committee chairmanships. And, there was a question about whether he was going to be able to do that because there's been this streak of independence in the council, and his plan hasn't been well received by everyone. There were some members who spoke out against his plan, saying this hasn't been a transparent or democratic process. Johnson would disagree. His floor leader, Alderman Carlos Ramirez-Rosa, I think, would disagree. But he did get that through with a big margin of 41 to 9.
Okay.
And so that's a really good ratio. And it sends a strong message that he did do the work behind the scenes to get people on board with his structure reorg. Now, another serious matter in council, which I'm sure we'll talk about, was delayed, which is that funding for migrants, $51 million, was delayed by 3 conservative aldermen. And so that was a hurdle he wasn't able to get over on Wednesday, but they'll be back next week to take that matter up again.
As we talked a moment ago, Paris, about the kind of rapport that Johnson seemed to have with the aldermen, quite a change from his predecessor. No?
Quite a change from his predecessor on the inauguration, turning around to all the alder people being sworn in on their big day with their families in attendance and waving her finger and saying, no to aldermanic prerogative and things like that. But yeah, Brandon Johnson's a funny guy and he's a charismatic guy and people genuinely like him. And I do think that that's something that could be used to his advantage to kind of twist a couple arms, to cajole a couple votes if he needs to. He's a great orator, which is something that neither the previous mayors going back to Harold Washington were, so that's going to be something new. But it's not as if he's going to need that extra jolt because, as Mariah mentioned, this vote, 41 to 9, for his council reorganization plan, which it seemed like for a while it might be up in the air that aldermen didn't want this to go. And those 9 seem to form the basis of maybe an opposition bloc. That's a very small opposition bloc. And the way I read it right now is Brandon Johnson has total control over city council. To start off, we don't know if that's going to be the case going forward. He will be able to get his initiatives passed pretty well if he keeps doing the work behind the scenes. These are margins that Daley had, that Rahm Emanuel had. And this is almost like a mandate he has, and it's going to serve him very well for his agenda, unless unless the financial or the crime picture starts to deteriorate.
Yeah, Tina, sounds like a big win for the new mayor.
It seemed nice that these people who supported Lori Lightfoot or Paul Vallis seemed to be saying, hey, we hated the gridlock over the past 4 years. We want to do things differently. And we heard that many times, and that is a hopeful message. Like as Paris said, he could get a lot done if this continues. If it doesn't, we've seen everything in Chicago. We don't really know how this will play out. But I do think Johnson's skills as having been a teacher, an organizer, a lobbyist, like all 3, I think will serve him well. He knows how to talk to people. He knows how to make deals. That's something that we haven't seen in the mayor's office.
And not to mention a pastor and the son of a pastor. He knows how to get up on the pulpit.
That's a lot of different
and command
facets.
The audience.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the idea that the mayor, again, is picking his friends and allies for these jobs. I mean, should taxpayers have any concerns that this is just business as usual
yes,
at City Hall.
Of course. I mean, the whole notion of the mayor kind of appointing the heads of these committees, it's a great way for him to cement power because the folks that get these chairmanships are so grateful. It means money, it means jobs. But we should mention that it's not all allies that he appointed. Like the Public Safety Committee, Alderman Brian Hopkins, 2nd Ward, was a Vallis supporter, not a Johnson supporter at all. And it's kind of like the old dictum: keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. And so that's kind of smart. That's a smart strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see Matt O'Shea, Alderman Matt O'Shea of the 19th Ward, whose ward went very strongly for Vallis. Matt O'Shea endorsed Vallis. He's leading the Aviation Committee. Alderman Nick Spizzato, one of the council's most conservative members, is holding his committee chairmanship of the Recreation and Cultural Affairs Committee. He calls it the Happy Committee. But you do see him. I mean,
I know
those were some of.
You mean the Happy Committee?
The Happy Committee. Those are, some of the chips that he traded. He was smart to appoint Alderman Jason Irvin to the Budget Committee. Of course, Jason Irvin did endorse Johnson after first endorsing Lightfoot in the first round. He was one of Lightfoot's biggest allies, but he gave him a powerful committee. And Jason Irvin also heads the council's Black Caucus, and so he may be, brings in some people with that appointment as well. And so he has done.
So there's a little bit of a mix in there.
Yeah, and he said every alderman I've spoken to, no alderman that I've spoken to has said I haven't gotten a call from Johnson since he won. So I do think he did work to call people.
He's in touch.
Make
He's
connections.
Trying to.
Can I just add in really quickly? The problem with these committees is some of them just never meet and do anything. And I think Block Club did that story about the committee on migrants or whatever.
Yeah, immigration.
Never even met. Like during this whole immigration crisis, like some of them have no point whatsoever.
They didn't meet for a little over a year.
Right.
Yeah, which is wild considering what happened within that exact year. We're going to pick up the weekly news recap, folks, in just a moment. We've got WBEZ's Mariah Woelfel, WTTW's Paris Schutz, and Tina Sfondeles with the Chicago Sun-Times. But first, an Uptown Theater could be getting a major upgrade. Here's Claire Lane.
Yeah, it's the Black Ensemble Theater pitching a multi-use development on the city's north side. It's 47 years old and wants to build a media and tech center, a public plaza, performance hall, and a 50-apartment residential building. This is all on Clark Street. A $70 million project now needs city approval. Also, the 2023 French Open Tennis Championship begins this weekend. The 14-time champion Rafael Nadal is missing with an injury, but on the women's side, there are 3 clear favorites, so plenty of tennis fans can look forward to that over the weekend. And this is interesting. Last year, a record number of people died from heat-related cases in Maricopa County. This is in Arizona. This year, local government is spending more on heat mitigation than ever before, and that's with the help of ARPA funds. So I'll have more on that story later today during Here and Now, which starts this Friday after 2 o'clock. More of Reset continues in just a moment. Stay with us.
WBEZ is supported by Bass, Berry & Sims Healthcare Law Practice for the caretakers and the changemakers, providing transactional, regulatory, and compliance and investigative advice to providers across the country. More at bassberry.com.
I'm Peter Sagal. This week, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me heads down to New Orleans to talk with special guest John Goodman. Throw beads at your radio and we'll show you our jokes. That's Wait, Wait from NPR. Saturday at 10 and again Sunday morning at 11 on WBEZ.
Going to have a pretty nice afternoon ahead. Plenty of sunshine. It's going to be a little bit warmer. I'll get to a high in the low 70s today. Cooler along the lakefront with a high in the low 60s. Right now, sun is shining. 67 degrees at O'Hare and Kankakee, sunny, and already 71 degrees.
On the next Science Friday, looking into the caps on your chromosomes called telomeres.
It was assumed that this DNA, this rather boring TTA, over and over again, and it wouldn't encode RNA or proteins. And that's been the dogma.
But perhaps that's wrong. What can they tell us about aging and disease? That's on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
That's this afternoon at 1 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago.
Looking for something to do? WBEZ has got you covered. We put on events each month, and you're invited to them all. Check out the list now at wbez.org/events.
We've got about 56 degrees along the lakefront at 1224. This is WBEZ.
I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the weekly news recap on Reset. where we make sense of the week's top local and state stories. Now, before the break, we discussed alarming news of child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. And we also looked back at Mayor Johnson's first city council meeting, but there is more to get to.
The Chicago City Council is set to vote today on using $51 million in emergency funds to help an influx of migrants coming to the city.
Mayor Johnson addressed the heated debate, but did not give specifics of a plan, reminding reporters that he inherited this crisis, and he's only been on the job for less than 2 weeks.
A new set of budget delays hit the State House, meaning lawmakers are looking at session this holiday weekend.
I'm standing alongside Senate President Don Harmon and House Speaker Chris Welch to announce that we have an agreement on a balanced budget for the coming year.
Our panel today, Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, Paris Schutz, WTTW correspondent and co-anchor of Chicago Tonight, and Mariah Woelfel, WBEZ city politics reporter. And we are still live on WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube pages for those who prefer to watch. Let's get an update on the legislative session in Springfield, shall we? Tina, lawmakers had hoped to be done last Friday, and that didn't happen. So yes. What was the holdup?
Well, there was a self-imposed deadline by Democratic leaders that they would finish by May 19th. They blew that. And then on Wednesday, they had a really nice press conference with the governor. It was actually about 45 minutes late, so we were getting worried. And then they come in, which actually was a thing. They were still negotiating. They said there was an agreement, and then we're still negotiating. Had a late press conference, still said there was an agreement, and they did not pass a budget till last night. Just before midnight, the Illinois Senate passed a budget. It's $50.6 billion in spending. A lot of things in there. The Illinois House is supposed to take it up today. So they are about a week late on this.
Definitely a week late on this. Okay, so we finally have a state budget. Were you surprised at all, though, Paris, that, it took lawmakers past a week, a week past their deadline?
Well, I'm surprised they set a deadline for a week ago because there was no reason to. It just has to pass before,
this was the deadline they
June.
set for themselves, though.
Yeah, and I think that they didn't think they were going to hit because they have super majorities. Like, well, we have super majorities. Where's the disagreement going to be? But there are sticking points here, and especially this issue of Medicaid-style health care for migrants, asylum seekers, folks that are here. And it was originally tabbed to be $200 million, and now the projections are it's going to cost $1 billion. And so I think Tina would know better than me, but they came to some compromise where they project it won't cost $1 billion, but they're saying things like, well, we're going to put in controls to manage the costs. I don't really know what that means,
right.
But maybe Tina can enlighten me on that.
They did. They tried to. That was a big sticking point in budget negotiations all week, especially with the House Democratic Caucus.
And we're talking about health care for undocumented immigrants.
That's right. Not the migrant money or refugee money.
Right.
This is separate. This is undocumented health care. And so it was a sticking point behind the scenes in House Democratic caucuses between progressives and moderates and with the governor's office, because they didn't want to have to set a line item in the budget, not have enough, just have it be their responsibility, their political responsibility to say Democratic lawmakers only did this, they messed up, it's a political issue. So they wanted to put it on Pritzker a little bit. And as Paris said, he has the tools now, which is an authorization for the Department of Health and Human Services, I believe, to be able to better manage the budget. But there is a $550 million appropriations in one of the budget bills for this. So that's the number that we have, and then we have a potential expansion. So they got out of the political nervousness of this by doing it that way.
But there's also the pro-immigrant groups, Latino caucus, that want to lower the age where you could be eligible for this health care as an undocumented person to 19, because now it's 42. So they didn't lower the age.
They did not.
Obviously, that would explode the cost even more.
Yeah. That's to say there are way more issues that will come up with this, especially since there was a $1 billion estimate. And that's a lot of money if we were to have to pay that in the state.
And Tina, the budget's more than 3,400 pages long.
Yes.
You read it, right?
Super fun. Yeah, I read all of it.
All of it?
Read all of it.
So tell us
every lawmaker, I'm
tell
sure.
us everything.
I will tell you that a big focus of the governor's proposal back in February was education. He wants to be the governor that says, I saved education in Illinois, I made it better, higher education, public education. So that is a huge focus. There's a lot of good things, a lot of money for K through 12 for early education, and that's
nice.
A win-win. It's not like Republicans can say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so mad you gave money to the kids." So it was. He thought about that. There aren't a lot of people speaking out about the fact that education is getting a big boost.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lawmakers passed a lot of bills this session. One of them could help catch carjackers. Now, Sheriff Tom Dart has long been calling for a carjacking hotline where car manufacturers would be forced to basically help law enforcement find these stolen cars. Let's listen to what he said recently.
We are left with people who are talking to us about search warrants. They're talking to us about, you need to call back between 9 to 5 on the weekday. So the excuses have been voluminous. One is more insane than the next, and all of them are unacceptable.
So how would this new legislation help police catch carjackers?
Just as Sheriff Dart said, it would be a 24/7 hotline. So the car manufacturers would have to help law enforcement find these cars in a more efficient way. And Dart has been trying to help with this issue for many years. There's a task force that he started 2 years ago. I'm sure we all remember in 2020, during like the peak of the pandemic, that there were horrible stories of the South Loop of people stealing SUVs with babies in the car. Just the worst stories.
I mean, it
that were
continued when I
terrifying.
got here in 2021. Those were some of the first stories I covered when I got here.
So that is something that he's been targeting for years. So that task force has been finding people, has been finding the cars. And I guess Patrick Smith from WBEZ did a good story a couple days ago about how they're finding the cars, but the people aren't really being prosecuted. It's a whole other issue. But Dart does want this to help kind of seal that, have them find all the cars. And he wants this on a federal level. He thinks that this is not just happening in Chicago and Cook County, that this is happening everywhere, and there needs to be more help from the federal government.
And some other interesting legislation got passed. So we've already talked about full-day kindergarten in public schools, Tina. I know there's also legislation that would allow businesses to create gender-neutral bathrooms.
Yes.
And another bill aiming to increase diversity in the construction industry.
Yes. I would say the gender neutral bathroom
Or
was
it's a multi-occupant.
Which I personally been in some of those already. So
multi-occupancy ones?
Yes, where you just go to the bathroom and everyone's in there.
Right.
I don't know, maybe it's the places that I'm going to.
I haven't been in one yet, but I know that they exist.
They exist.
Well, isn't this like the whole point of this is to make sure at the stalls that the doors go all the way down to the floor because there's more privacy?
It's ensuring that businesses know that they are able to do this. So it is not mandating them to do that. And that is what Democrats were very clear about on the floor. There also was no political mention about the fact that this is intended to protect the LGBTQ plus community, but they didn't want to make it a political issue. They just kept it to, we want people to be able to have the freedom to do this. Senate Republicans last week were pretty testy. Some of them were. There was one who said that he would beat someone up if his daughter was in a bathroom and a man came in. It was pretty aggressive. It's still talked about on the floor yesterday. State Representative Kelly Cassidy mentioned it.
Yeah, it was pretty
because
aggressive.
there was a threat of violence, and that's bad. And so that's the kind of arguments that we've been hearing from some Republicans, not all. They also just said this is a useless bill because it's not a mandate. It's just telling businesses they are allowed to build these bathrooms. As Paris said, no urinals. It's just a floor-to-ceiling, multi-capacity, non-gender bathroom. So you technically wouldn't really see the people unless maybe you're washing your hands by the sink. Yeah.
And before we switch gears here, I want to talk about a notable bill that stalled in this session. That's the tax incentive bill to help the Bears move to Arlington Heights.
Oh, yes. That was the first bill. They kind of went rogue is what I was hearing.
Paris, are you smiling?
No, I'm smiling at the thought that off-season workouts have begun and Justin Fields is throwing to DJ Moore, and it's going to be an awesome. It's going to be an awesome
He's
season.
Daydreaming.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Sorry, I just add lots of jokes about losing in my story. Sorry, you're more optimistic. But yeah, this was not a big surprise. They did try to throw in that getting state help for a new stadium, and people were really upset about it because they said, you have lots of money, you're one of the top earning teams in the country, figure it out. And so there's a new proposal that floated last week. They're going to work through the summer, try to get something passed. It's better because these municipalities around Arlington Heights would be getting some help for their school districts, for projects, for infrastructure projects. So they're being a little bit more included. So it looks like it will move. It's just that initial one, people hated it so much.
It's all part of the ebb and flow. But I remember Marty Moylan, the state representative from Des Plaines, isn't he like one of the principal sponsors of this, saying like, the Bears don't have a big lobbying presence down here. If they want to get our attention, you got to bring like Ditka and Singletary and
he wants to do that. He wants to bring players when this is
have
being
Urlacher
discussed.
come down and say, hey guys, like that would be a cinch. You want to get your bill passed, get those guys down there, and
I haven't
boom.
seen him in so long beyond the
hair
billboards. Yeah, so I'd love to see
Bring
him
him
in real
down
life.
there with a whole full beautiful head of hair.
Love to
and
see that.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with WTTW's Paris Schutz, Tina Sfondeles from the Chicago Sun-Times, and WBEZ's Mariah Woelfel. All right, Mariah, I want to turn to the migrant families who continue to arrive here from Texas. Now, City Council delayed a vote that would have authorized $51 million in funding for migrant services. So what's the roadblock here?
So that is $51 million of surplus funding from 2021 that the city's budget director under Lightfoot said they put away to, for unanticipated emergencies. And so they want to tap into that fund to pay for staffing, food, and resources at the city's 7 shelters and 3 respite centers, and hopefully help to open more shelters as well. But there's been this ongoing and contentious debate in the city council from, kind of 2 camps, one sort of coming from maybe a not in my backyard. This isn't my neighborhood's not the right fit for this, for shelters. And we don't want to use $51 million of city funding for new residents when, there are plenty of Chicagoans in need of help.
Which alderpersons are opposed?
So this was blocked by a group of conservative aldermen, Alderman Raymond Lopez, Anthony Napolitano, and Anthony Beal, who, afterwards, Beal kind of repeated the same argument that why should I approve $51 million for a group of people when my residents can't get the services they need? I have homeless residents that I'm dealing with already. And so there is that concern there, and what is called deferred and published it, which basically just banishes the proposal to the council's next full meeting, which is why we see a new meeting pop up for next week so that they can kind of get this done. This funding, though, it's not a panacea, obviously. $51 million sounds like a lot. That's only going to last the city until the end of June. They're trying to make up for, hundreds of millions of dollars in denied federal and state funding that, they've requested tens of millions of dollars, multiple rounds of grants from the state and the city or from the federal government and the state, and have gotten, really small portions of that. Smaller from the feds. I think the state has helped out a lot more with this, but they've only gotten $4 million from the federal government this year.
Wow. As Mariah mentioned there, Paris, housing these migrants, mixed reaction all over the city. I'm curious what you're hearing from residents and just your reporters at Chicago Tonight.
Yeah, well, that's the latest proposal is to house about, 400 at Wright Junior College on the northwest side. And so the alderman there, Nick Sposato, got all up in arms when he heard that. He's, we got to have a community meeting then. And at these community meetings, like in South Shore, it feels like the majority of the residents that have showed up have been opposed to relocating migrants here. And now what everybody says, because this gets to be kind of delicate and there's issues of race involved here, but what Sposato has said and what other folks that are opposed have said, it's not that we don't want to take care of migrants. It's that we don't want something imposed on us like this without our input, A, and B, if there are these resources for these new arrivals, well, what about these disinvested communities that have been in this situation for decades and decades? What about the resources? Can't we share the wealth a little bit? Can't we take care of everybody, not just migrants? And certainly they have a point there, and that's why this is tricky. And it's very tricky for Brandon Johnson because Johnson is progressive, and he got elected on the winds of progressive voters, progressive groups that do want to maintain Chicago's status as a welcoming city and a sanctuary city. But then he knows that, especially South Shore, there are members of the African-American community that feel like you're kind of selling us out a little bit if you're going to give these resources to new arrivals.
Yeah. Speaking of sanctuary city, our friend on YouTube, Chicago 675, says, so being a sanctuary city isn't cheap, huh?
Well, of course not, and but there does need to be more federal funding. I interviewed Senator Durbin this week on it, and he just kind of gives a yes. We know that he can't give me a definitive. Is there more federal funds going to come for the city of Chicago? And Texas Governor Greg Abbott keeps sending these folks over. It feels like a political stunt, obviously, but we should mention that Texas is on the border, and they're getting inundated, and so it's kind of like, he's saying to Illinois, you want to know what it's really like to be a sanctuary city? Like, this is what it costs. This is what we've been going through. So, there's no comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level, and that's the only thing that could really solve a lot of this.
Well, and that's the argument too. I mean, I spoke with Alderman David Moore, who does not support. He represents the Inglewood neighborhood. His many parts of his ward have long been disinvested and starved for resources. And he says this is a federal issue. Democrats controlled the House and the Senate previously under Joe Biden, and they weren't able to find a solution to this issue. And so, basically he sees the city spending $51 million as a bailout for the federal government and doesn't want to see the city, even provide that Band-Aid.
Can I add one more thing? And here is one fix that's just been really hard to do, is to somehow relax the work requirements. Because the federal law is that if you're here seeking asylum, waiting for your hearing, you can't actually work. And everybody has acknowledged it is much better if migrants are here that they be authorized to work. Because what happens now is, they are reliant on this funding, or they go out and get jobs under the table. They're not paying taxes, and then they get exploited. And so, but there's I don't see any political will anywhere to change that. I don't even know if they can do that on the city level and say, we're going to give you authorization to work even though the feds don't. I don't know.
Some back and forth on YouTube in response to Chicago 675's comment about sanctuary cities not being cheap. Our friend Shamrock Bloom says it absolutely is not, but we're helping desperate people who are feeling oppressive regimes. There needs to be a lot more transparency from the mayor's office. We'll take a pause right here, and we'll pick up the weekly news recap in just a moment with WBEZ's Mariah Woelfel, WTTW's Schutz, and Tina Sfondeles from the Chicago Sun-Times. But first, the number of Illinoisans who are planning to get away this Memorial Day weekend, it's up. Here's Claire.
Yeah, the Sun-Times reports over 2 million Illinois residents are expected to travel at least 50 miles by car, by plane, by other means of transportation this weekend. And that number is just shy of 2019's all-time record for Memorial Day travel. The Chicago Department of Aviation anticipates over 1.5 million people will travel through O'Hare and Midway through Tuesday, and that number is up nearly 9% versus last year. AAA is projecting the spike to be even more prominent at Midway, with an expected increase of about 20% compared to Memorial Day last year. Overseas, Turkey's voters head to the polls this weekend in a decisive runoff vote. It's the first time voters have ever gone to the ballot box in a second-round vote for a new president. So we'll have more on this story during All Things Considered later today after 3 o'clock. Here in the city, the Chicago Sky's home opener is tonight. This is against the Washington Mystics. The Sky are 2-0 so far this season. Home veteran Kalia Cooper says that the early wins on the road are crucial for the young team. That's Copper, not Cooper. More of Reset continues next. Stay with us.
WBEZ is supported by Adler University, preparing students to become socially responsible practitioners and promote healthy communities with degrees in psychology, counseling, public policy, and leadership. Adler.edu.
WBEZ is also supported by Ravinia, with over 100 concerts under the stars this summer, including Miss Lauryn Hill, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Santana, and more. Pavilion and lawn tickets available at ravinia.org.
How does someone become one of the most celebrated artists in history and then tear it all down? On an all-new season of Making from WBEZ Chicago, the rise and fall of Kanye West. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Join WBEZ's Shoes Off, a Sexy Asians podcast for a special hour honoring Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We'll talk to trailblazers like journalist Lisa Ling, actor John Cho, and more. That's tomorrow at 11 on 91.5 WBEZ.
And we'll have a special rebroadcasting of that episode on Memorial Day at noon right here on 91.5. Weather for today, plenty of sunshine. It's going to be warmer. We'll get to a high in the low to mid-70s. A little bit cooler for you along the lake. But that sun's helping quite a bit. Right now we've got mostly sunny skies, 67 degrees at O'Hare and Wheeling, sunny and 64 at 12:43. This is WBEZ.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we're back with more of our weekly news recap, giving you a closer look at the week's top stories across Chicago and Illinois. Now, before the break, we took a deep dive into what happened in Springfield as lawmakers wrapped up the spring session, but we've still got more news to cover. Our panel, Tina Sfondeles, chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, Schutz, WTTW correspondent and co-anchor of Chicago Tonight, and Mariah Woelfel, WBEZ city politics reporter, and we are still live on Facebook and YouTube. Now, the Inspector General, that's the city's watchdog, issued a pretty concerning report, Mariah, about Chicago police. So what did the investigation reveal?
Sure. It showed that more than 100 Chicago police officers were allowed to remain on the job or had recently been on the job who were found guilty of making false reports. And so these were officers who were some assigned to special FBI, specialized units like an FBI task force. this is even though dismissal for breaking what's known as Rule 14 is, the consequence is dismissal.
And by Rule 14, you mean Lori Lightfoot's "you lie, you die" rule.
Right. When Lightfoot was president of the police board, she called it the "you lie, you die" rule. But Deborah Witzberg, Inspector General, revealed that more than 100 officers, remained on the job despite that.
So what recommendations did the IG make?
One, that police officers, the recommendation should always be that a police officer gets fired for lying or making a false report.
Mm-hmm.
They should be dismissed from the department. Two, that they need to have better record keeping and ensure that they're fulfilling their obligation to inform prosecutors of officers who have violated Rule 14 previously, because these officers, in 2 instances highlighted in the report, have then gone on to testify in court, even though, it's on their record that they have on record in police reports, made false statements.
Wow, incredible. Tina, a utility watchdog is sounding another alarm here. This one is over a record-setting rate hike that ComEd is hoping to get from the state. Details?
Yes, they are hoping to pass this gigantic rate that would affect all of us.
Yeah.
And along with People's Gas also seeking a big rate that they also would need approval for. It could be about like $18 a month for both of them for our energy bills. So the Citizens Utility Board is obviously fighting this. Illinois Commerce Commission is the one who has to approve this. Obviously, ComEd has a PR problem right now.
A lot going on in their camp.
There was actually a bill in the General Assembly, an Ameren bill affecting other parts of the state, and ComEd wanted in on it, and just them being included on it was a no-no because of the bribery convictions that just happened in federal courts, and also Mike Madigan on trial next month.
Mm-hmm.
So this is affecting them.
Is that next month?
Next year.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I'm like, I'm not ready for that just yet. But yeah, so they have to try to work on this. They say that they need it. They need it to work on the energy grid. They said it's related to climate change or all these good reasons that they say they need this big increase. And it's up to the Illinois Commerce Commission to accept it. And it's possible that they won't because of what has gone on.
Paris, restaurant owners in the trendy Fulton Market area in the West Loop, they made news this week, and they were announcing that they had their own plans for how to reduce crime. Mm-hmm. What are they saying?
Well, they want to get private security, and it cost somewhere close to about $1 million, and they probably have to get private money to pay for it. It doesn't seem like there'll be any public or neighborhood money that will pay for that. And interestingly, the alderman there, 27th Ward, Walter Burnett, supported. He thinks this is a good idea. It's something that has happened in Lincoln Park. It's obviously a reaction to either the perception or the reality of rising crime. Mm-hmm. Fulton Market area, West Loop, is not a hotbed of crime, although I think some crime rates have gone up in that area. And obviously it's the hottest area of the city in terms of restaurants and real estate and businesses. And so their businesses are contingent on people feeling safe going there. But the problem is, what authority does private security really have? What is their job? I mean, they can't arrest you. I mean, their job is to kind of just stand there and make people feel like, oh, well, I guess we're being watched over. And then if something weird happens, they call the cops.
Right.
So, I mean, that's basically what it is.
I mean, this is $800,000 a year.
Yeah.
This would cost.
Yeah, it's not cheap, although when you pool the resources of all these very trendy restaurants and businesses, it seems like they could probably afford that. But, the broader debate of is this what we want to become? Do we want to have private security patrolling everywhere? Do we want to feel like we're a police state? That's a debate worth having. I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Mariah, some city restaurant owners are celebrating as outdoor dining season gets underway. Mayor Johnson is ensuring that they can continue to offer an alfresco experience on city streets.
Yeah, this was an initiative by his predecessor, former Mayor Lori Lightfoot, that didn't really, get off the ground. But he wants to make outdoor dining permanent throughout the city. And this really was a popular option during the pandemic that I think a lot of restaurants have enjoyed. And so that's still going to need city council approval. But, you start to see him building these relationships with the restaurant industry. I think Lightfoot had a pretty strong relationship with the restaurant industry and worked closely with them during the pandemic. And so you saw him introduce that today, and we'll continue to follow it as it moves through city council.
I mean, as the weather gets warm, who's looking forward to dining outside?
Oh my God! I was driving here along the beach, and
I get so jealous passing people sitting out there.
The Oak Street Bistro is opening up. I'm like, summer is actually here. Oh my God! I can't believe it.
I feel like Logan Square does this very early. If it's like a 60-degree day, we don't care. The windows are open. Everyone's happy.
You're like shivering. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, we don't care.
I had pizza up there, and I was like, I was outside, and I don't even think it was that warm. It was like 60.
Yeah, we don't care.
But I was like, I'm going to sit out here, and I'm going to commit. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with WTTW's Paris Schutz, Tina Sfondeles of the Chicago Sun-Times, and WBEZ's Mariah Woelfel. So talking about summertime, I mean, this is the unofficial start, I think, to summer this weekend. And the Chicago Park District, unfortunately, they gave some bad news. This is about the city's pools, Mariah.
Still struggling with a lifeguard shortage. It's a local and national problem, though they have seen apparently double the number of applications for lifeguards than they did last year. And so they are confident maybe by the end of June they'll be able to open pools. Indoor pools are now closed so that they can shift lifeguards to the beaches, which open today. And, I mean, if you want to make some extra cash, I guess, apply to be a lifeguard. Obviously, the Park District has dealt with a PR crisis over, the investigation by WBEZ's Dan Mihalopoulos about lifeguard sexual harassment in the parks. And so that's something that they continue to deal with. They're offering incentives, a $600 retention bonus, and a day pass to Lollapalooza, I think I saw, and so they're trying their best to get people
really
to sign
trying
up.
to day pass to Lollapalooza. So beaches opened today at 11 a.m. Just fun fact, no date announced yet on when any of the Park District pools will be open, but officials are hoping for June 23rd. I mentioned this story earlier to a WBEZ colleague, and she was like, "We still have indoor pools?"
Yeah, a lot of parents love the indoor pools.
Indoor pools they're great.
I am actually actively in search of the nearest indoor pool that I can,
They've got some beautiful indoor pools. Eckert Park near me is it's my favorite indoor pool. They have like glass window garage doors that they can open during the summer.
Oh.
So it's, it's closed during the winter, and then it's like fresh air.
See, I like that.
Sasha, another summer thing that's starting tomorrow is the Millennium Park workouts. My favorite thing in the whole world.
What? That is,
and maybe you'll see the foxes.
Yeah,
as you do yoga.
What a great segue, Tina, because I was just about to talk about the foxes. For folks who might have missed it, if you live near Millennium Park, you found out that you have some new wild neighbors. Parents, tell us about this family.
Well, I want to credit the great photojournalists like Colin Boyle at Block Club and a couple others that really snapped some beautiful photos of this fox family to sort of bring this to Chicagoans' attention that Millennium Park, it's got some residents. A family of foxes. They snap photos of fox, little cub going and getting some food in the name of a rat. Carrying around the rat in their mouth, and and the folks there say that the foxes, they can coexist with the humans. Just leave them alone, and they'll leave you alone. But it's there's
sometimes they were even hiding once they saw humans.
I love the sort of the wildlife that sort of exists among us. In this big sprawling city, like right outside my door, I have a couple of coyotes that just kind of walk back and forth, and they start yawping at night, and it's just it's great. We can all coexist. There's that big fat turtle in the Chicago River. And
you mean Chunkosaurus?
Chunkosaurus, and I got to credit...
Call her by her name.
Joey Santor, the botanist guy with the Chicago accent that found her. It's a her.
It's a her.
Right, it's her, because she was perhaps about to lay a bunch of eggs. So, hey, folks, there's a lot of nature in Chicago. You just got to go out and find it.
It sure is. Now, since Memorial Day is that unofficial kickoff to summer, we thought that we would ask you all to share maybe your favorite summer activity. So one that you've been dreaming about since January or February. I'm going to go to you first, Tina, because you just brought up those workouts.
What I'm trying to do in the summer?
Yeah. What are you looking forward to?
I will definitely.
There's that.
This is like
Anything
a really
else?
nerdy thing, but I collect a bunch of people to do these workouts. It is Pilates, yoga, cardio, kickboxing, and Zumba. And sometimes you just do all of them. as your like one major exercise of the week.
And then you collapse?
And then you go to brunch and then you eat off all of what you just burned.
Nice sweaty brunch.
Yeah,
I'd like to join you, Tina, but isn't this at some like ungodly hour of the morning?
8 a.m. Pilates, 9 a.m. yoga,
Oh, that's
10
not
a.m.
bad.
cardio
That's
kickboxing.
not too
the
bad.
Zumba's the best because it's always like elderly ladies from various communities. And it's just a lot of like, it's cultural. It's really fun. It's not just like oomps oomps. It's like good music and like a variety of people.
You do them all?
I do all of them.
Wow.
I don't know what to tell you.
I just started doing yoga. We'll talk after the show because I feel cool now. I feel like I've joined this community that's
you are cool.
Existed for a long time that I never felt like I was welcome, but now I'm here.
I can't
I'm here to stay.
touch my toes.
Yeah, no, I still can't. Well, I can, but not very well.
I can't even come close. It's a work in progress.
What about you, Mariah?
My perfect summer day is like jumping in the water at Promontory Point. It's just such a picturesque piece of the city. You feel like you're out of the city. It's actually gorgeous. Yeah, it's just so beautiful. You have the rocks there, and so like jumping in the water and then soaking in the sun until you get so hot that you're sweating, and then you jump back in and just on repeat.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
Gotta love it. What about you, Paris?
Well, I like to play music. I play keyboards, and so in the summer I love doing these outdoor concerts. And
Really?
Oh yeah.
Where can we see you play?
Well, I'm playing a small little festival out near Harvard on June 2nd called Nest Fest. It's kind of organized by some friends of mine, and a lot of fun if anyone wants to look it up. It's called Nest Fest, and I'll be playing in a band out there. It's like on a farm, and we'll be like on a tractor bed as our stage.
Wow.
And then I'll be playing a solo keyboard piano set with lots of electronic beats and fun stuff. So summer to me is
talented
music. It's just being outdoors, and the best is when you like play and it's dusk and the sun's going down, and by the time you finish your show, the stars are out, and it's magic.
Pretty awesome. I feel like we can combine all three activities in one.
And we can do yoga. I'll play music while Tina and Mariah do yoga and Zumba.
It's absolutely perfect. Sounds like a plan. All right, before we go, let's look ahead to next week, shall we? What are you watching for, Mariah?
Well, I think, a large portion of the city, a lot of Chicagoans are watching this weekend. With Memorial Day comes a spike in violence historically. And so not to end on a terrible note, but Brandon Johnson announced his safety plans this week. They largely rely on past approaches to trying to mitigate crime. They're canceling officers' days off, boosting police officers in different areas. We're also seeing, though, peacekeepers in yellow vests from the state, 30 peacekeepers in, hot spots to try to mitigate violence.
Yeah,
so I think
all eyes are on this weekend.
Yeah, and I think that, there will be, stories to look out for.
Oh, you'll be busy, and you'll be back. Real quick, Paris.
This is a very obscure one, but there's a bill in the General Assembly that deals with Chicago police and fire pensions. I won't get into all the specifics, but the long and short of it is it would change the pension system for a lot of police and firemen. That would add a lot of costs.
Yeah.
It would mean billions over many years for the city of Chicago. It's something that Mayor Lightfoot opposed. I don't know where Brandon Johnson stands on it, but that's going to be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, and you, Tina?
I will be digesting that $3,450.6 billion Illinois budget.
She'll be reading the budget.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. That's it for the weekly news recap. My thanks to Tina Sfondeles of the Chicago Sun-Times, WBEZ reporter Mariah Woelfel, and WTTW Channel 11's Paris Schutz. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And that's it for Reset. Now, on Monday, we are going to bring you a special 1-hour episode of Reset that digs into the significance of Memorial Day and discusses civic engagement. So tune in for that programming Monday at 11. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Thank you for listening, and have a great long weekend. We'll meet again soon.
Good afternoon. You're listening to 91.5 WBEZ. I'm Claire Lane. Almost